Welcome back. This video will explain the tribute system, the Canton system, and the causes and immediate outcomes of the Qianlong Emperor's meeting with Britain's Lord Macartney in 1793. The Qing dynasty's universal empire was more culturally flexible than that of the Ming, but ultimately still viewed sovereignty, that is, the dynasty's right to govern, as essentially unbounded geographically. This explains why they continued the Ming dynasty's practice of the tribute system. Under the tribute system, legal trade was conducted alongside political missions in which the ruler of one state, say from a place like Korea, Vietnam, or the small Ryukyu Islands, would pledge fealty to the emperor in Beijing. By the 17th century, this system was simply how international relations worked in East Asia. But it was also not really viable for Europeans who wanted to trade for goods like tea and for porcelain, but would not submit themselves to Qing hegemony. Deals were very gradually worked out to accommodate Western interests. The Portuguese, for example, were allowed to continue operating out of the narrow peninsula at Macau. Meanwhile, the Russians secured a treaty in 1727 allowing limited direct overland trade in exchange for Russian furs. Soon, the English, French, and other European powers were also interested in regular trade. The Qing relented in 1757 by establishing what became known as the Canton system, known for the port city of Guangzhou, or Canton, where it was based. European traders would be tolerated outside the usual tribute system, but only under strict conditions. They had first to stay outside the city gates, and they could only stay during the trading season from October to March. Meanwhile, no Western women would be allowed. Along the way, no armaments would be permitted, and trade had to be tightly regulated, operating out of one of 13 authorized Hong merchants. The Qing Empire gained two assurances from this system. First, they gained control. Chinese merchants were held responsible for Western behavior. And second, they gained profit. Private interests certainly benefited from a monopoly. At least one Chinese merchant, Hokwa, or Wu Bingjian, amassed enough wealth to become one of the richest people in the world. The state also benefited, with the system ensuring customs duties were paid in full. So, what was the problem? Westerners had plenty of complaints. First, they were unhappy with the restrictions on movement. Second, they were frustrated with differences in legal practice, from aggressive interrogation practices used to the idea that it was responsibility that was more important than guilt or innocence. In 1784, for example, 2 Chinese fishermen were killed when British guns aboard the Lady Hughes inadvertently misfired. The accidental nature of the death was less important to the Chinese than the fact that the 2 lives had been taken. Qing officials executed the 2 gunners to the horror of Western traders. Westerners also grew frustrated by corruption and lack of recourse when they had complaints. All of this corresponded with the emergence of Enlightenment thinking, including the doctrine of free trade in the West. Adam Smith famously published The Wealth of Nations in the same year as the American colonists were penning their Declaration of Independence. Despite grudging acceptance of American secession in 1783, George III still governed an empire that was very much on the rise. It was in this context that, in 1793, Lord George Macartney had set out to meet the Qianlong Emperor. Macartney was an Irish-born aristocrat who had served a number of important roles, including as ambassador to Russia, governor of both British West Indies and Madras, which was part of British India. His trip to China on behalf of George III marked the last posting in a respected career. The Qianlong Emperor is remembered as one of China's best-known and most respected emperors. He was then winding down a reign that marked the end of a flourishing period begun with his grandfather, the Kangxi Emperor. He was known for his bold military campaigns in the west and for his grand tours in the south. Indeed, he liked Suzhou so much that he built a replica of it in Beijing. When Macartney trekked north to the imperial retreat at Chengde, he arrived only to have his hopes for Western-style diplomatic ties and expanded trading opportunities dashed. A series of misunderstandings and cultural conflicts was symbolized by Macartney's refusal to kowtow, or kowtow. In a letter addressed to George III, the Qianlong Emperor asserted that, "I set no value on objects strange or ingenious, and have no use for your country's manufactures." This, of course, strengthened Western perceptions of Chinese cultural arrogance. It is worth pointing out that we should be careful in taking the letter at face value. The Qianlong Emperor, like any leader, was more attuned to domestic audiences than to those abroad. And we know that he was willing to draw on Western technology and goods that he did find useful, from artwork to cannons to clocks.